They can't control your mind, so they attack your image. The moment you stop begging for approval, people start feeling uncomfortable around you. Not because you changed into something evil, but because you became impossible to manipulate. Some people only feel powerful when they can predict your reactions, control your emotions, or make you doubt yourself. And when your silence no longer breaks, when your confidence no longer depends on their validation, they begin to resent you for it. That dislike you feel from others. Sometimes it's not hatred, it's frustration. Frustration that they lost access to the version of you they could influence, guilt, or control. Because a person who thinks independently becomes dangerous to those who survive by controlling others. Silence confuses people more than anger ever will. Anger gives them something to fight. Fear gives them something to control. But silence leaves them alone with their own thoughts, and most people are terrified of that place. They don't know how to handle someone who refuses to explain themselves, defend themselves, or react the way they expected. The moment you stop responding emotionally, you stop feeding the system they built around your weakness. Most people are trained to seek reactions. They throw criticism to see insecurity. They throw disrespect to see pain. They push your limits just to watch you lose control. And when you stay calm, when you say less, when your face no longer reveals what your mind is thinking, it creates discomfort inside them. Not because you harmed them, but because they lost the ability to read you. Weak minds need noise. They need constant reassurance that they still have influence over the people around them. That's why silence becomes a threat. A quiet person forces others to face uncertainty. They begin asking themselves questions they never wanted to ask. Why didn't that affect them? Why are they so calm? What are they thinking? And those questions slowly become obsession. People often mistake silence for weakness because they've never understood real strength. Real strength doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't argue endlessly, trying to prove intelligence. It doesn't waste energy, reacting to every insult thrown across the room. Weak people react instantly because they are controlled by emotion. Strong people observe first. They understand that not every battle deserves a response. There's something unsettling about a person who can sit in a room full of disrespect and still remain composed. It destroys the illusion of control. Most manipulation depends on emotional reaction. If someone can make you angry, they can guide your behavior. If they can make you insecure, they can shape your decisions. But when you remain silent, when your emotions stop performing for the crowd, manipulators begin to panic internally. That panic quickly transforms into judgment. Suddenly, they call you cold, arrogant, strange, difficult, not because you changed into those things, but because your silence stopped entertaining them. People become uncomfortable when they can no longer predict you. Human nature craves patterns. Once you break the pattern they were used to, they start creating negative stories about you just to feel in control again. Some people talk too much because they fear being ignored. Others speak constantly because silence exposes how empty they truly feel inside. A weak mind cannot survive long in silence because silence removes distraction. It forces self-reflection. And self-reflection is painful for people who spend their lives avoiding accountability. That's why calm people are often misunderstood. Their silence acts like a mirror. Without saying anything, they reveal the insecurity of everyone around them. Loud people begin talking even louder near them. Fake people become nervous. Manipulators grow frustrated. Insecure people start seeking validation from others just to reassure themselves that the quiet person is somehow the problem. The truth is, silence carries power because it cannot be easily controlled. Words can be twisted. Emotions can be exploited. Reactions can be used against you. But silence creates mystery, and mystery makes weak minds uncomfortable. They start imagining things that were never there. They project their own fears onto you, because your quietness leaves room for their imagination to destroy them. A person who has mastered silence no longer feels the need to explain every decision or defend every accusation. They understand something most people never learn. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts. Not every opinion deserves your energy, and not every attack deserves your reaction. The dangerous part is that silence changes the balance of power without making any noise at all. Control often disguises itself as care in the beginning. People tell you what's best for you, what choices you should make, how you should behave, who you should become. At first, it sounds harmless: advice, concern, guidance. But over time, you begin to notice something darker underneath it. The moment you stop obeying expectations, the warmth disappears. Respect turns into guilt. Support turns into pressure. And suddenly the people who claimed to care about you become angry the second you start thinking for yourself. That's because many relationships are built on silent agreements. Stay predictable. Stay dependent. Stay easy to influence. As long as you follow the role others created for you, everything feels peaceful. But the moment self-respect enters your mind, the balance changes. You stop apologizing for boundaries. You stop shrinking yourself to protect fragile egos. You stop asking permission to exist the way you truly are. And people who benefited from your obedience begin to feel threatened. Self-respect is dangerous because it breaks invisible chains. A person without self-respect constantly seeks approval. They tolerate disrespect because they fear losing acceptance. They stay quiet to avoid conflict. They betray their own instincts just to keep temporary peace alive. And manipulators depend on that weakness. They survive through guilt, pressure, emotional control, and fear. The moment you develop self-respect, manipulation stops working the same way. Guilt loses its power. Fear weakens. Emotional games become obvious. You begin recognizing how often people tried to shape your behavior for their convenience rather than your happiness. And once your eyes open to that reality, you can never fully return to who you were before. That's why people react aggressively when someone starts respecting themselves. They call it selfishness because they can no longer benefit from self-sacrifice. They call it arrogance because confidence exposes their own insecurity. They call it rebellion because your independence reminds them how trapped they are inside their own fear. Weak people often confuse control with connection. They think love means ownership. They think loyalty means obedience. They think respect means silence. But real respect cannot exist where freedom is missing. If someone only values you when you agree with them, they never respected you in the first place. They respected their influence over you. The world becomes uncomfortable when you stop needing validation. Suddenly, you no longer chase attention. You no longer explain yourself endlessly, hoping to be understood. You stop lowering your standards just to fit inside rooms that were built to keep you small. And people notice that shift immediately. Even if you never say a word about it, they feel it in your energy. Self-respect changes the way you walk into a room. Your silence becomes heavier. Your boundaries become clearer. Your presence stops begging for acceptance. And that terrifies people who built their confidence by controlling others emotionally. Some individuals become angry simply because they can no longer access the old version of you. The version that tolerated disrespect. The version that stayed available no matter how poorly they behaved. The version that kept sacrificing peace just to keep everyone comfortable. When that version disappears, they feel rejected by your growth. Control only survives where self-doubt exists. The more uncertain you are about your worth, the easier it becomes for others to manipulate your choices. That's why insecure environments punish confidence so quickly. They want you questioning yourself constantly because confusion creates dependency. But self-respect creates clarity. You begin noticing how many people only supported you when you were easier to manage. You notice who becomes irritated by your boundaries. You notice who suddenly accuses you of changing when all you really did was stop accepting behavior that damaged your peace. A person with self-respect becomes difficult to intimidate because they are no longer desperate to be liked by everyone. And once someone reaches that mindset, control begins to collapse naturally. The emotional chains weaken. The guilt stops working. The fear loses authority. The manipulation becomes visible for what it always was, an attempt to keep someone small enough to influence. People become uncomfortable around those they cannot influence. Not because influence is always evil, but because most human relationships are built on subtle forms of control. Approval controls behavior. Fear controls silence. Attention controls confidence. Society itself survives through pressure, expectation, and emotional conditioning. From childhood, people are taught to fit patterns, seek validation, avoid rejection, and obey invisible rules designed by others. So when someone appears who no longer depends on those things, it creates tension instantly. An independent mind is difficult to predict. That unpredictability scares people more than aggression ever could. Aggression can be confronted. Weakness can be manipulated. But a person who thinks for themselves without needing permission becomes impossible to fully control. And the moment people realize they can no longer shape your reactions, they start questioning their own power. Most individuals feel secure when they know how someone will respond. Compliment them, and they become loyal. Ignore them, and they become insecure. Criticize them, and they break emotionally. Human behavior usually follows familiar emotional patterns. But some people eventually stop operating that way. They stop reacting automatically. They stop allowing emotions to be controlled by outside pressure. And when that happens, weak minds interpret it as a threat. That threat has nothing to do with violence or dominance. It comes from psychological freedom. A person who cannot be emotionally manipulated forces others to confront something uncomfortable within themselves. It reminds them how dependent they are on validation, acceptance, or social approval. And insecurity always reacts aggressively when exposed. People fear what they can't influence because influence gives them certainty. It reassures them that they still matter, that they still have power, that they can still shape outcomes around them. Once that certainty disappears, anxiety enters the room. Suddenly, they begin overanalyzing everything about you. Your silence feels suspicious. Your calmness feels arrogant. Your independence feels disrespectful, not because you actually harmed anyone, but because your existence disrupts the emotional structure they rely on. Manipulators especially struggle around independent people. Manipulation depends on emotional access. If someone can trigger your anger, guilt, fear, or insecurity, they can guide your decisions without you even noticing. But once you become aware of your own emotions, once you stop reacting impulsively, manipulation starts failing, and failing control creates frustration. That frustration often transforms into dislike. People begin criticizing qualities they secretly envy. They mock discipline because they lack it. They attack confidence because they fear it. They label calm people as cold because they cannot emotionally dominate them anymore. Human beings often destroy what they fail to control. An independent person also breaks social expectations without trying. Most people unconsciously perform for others every day. They filter their personality for approval. They hide opinions to avoid rejection. They laugh at things they don't find funny just to fit inside the group. But someone who stops performing socially becomes unsettling to the crowd. Their authenticity exposes how artificial everyone else has become. That's why truly independent people are often misunderstood. Society praises freedom in theory, but punishes it in reality. The moment you stop following emotional trends, stop chasing approval, and stop fearing isolation, people begin projecting negative assumptions onto you. They need to believe something is wrong with you, because accepting your independence would force them to question their own dependence. Weak minds also confuse influence with importance. They believe controlling others proves strength, but real strength does not require ownership over someone else's identity. A secure person does not panic when others think differently. Only insecure people need emotional obedience from everyone around them. There's a reason calm, self-aware individuals often become isolated over time. Not because they hate people, but because they no longer participate in emotional games. They stop competing for attention. They stop explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. They stop sacrificing peace just to remain accepted inside shallow environments. And once someone reaches that point mentally, others begin sensing it immediately. Even in silence, independence carries weight. It changes body language, eye contact, energy, presence. People notice when someone no longer fears disapproval. That kind of freedom unsettles those who built their identity around controlling perception and influence. Because deep down, the thing weak minds fear most is meeting someone who cannot be psychologically owned. Dislike is rarely as simple as people pretend it is. Most of the time, what looks like hatred on the surface is actually frustration buried underneath pride. People don't always dislike you because you did something wrong. Sometimes they dislike you because they lost control of how you make them feel. And instead of admitting their own insecurity, they turn that discomfort into resentment. Human beings struggle with powerlessness more than almost anything else. The moment they realize they cannot influence someone emotionally, they begin searching for another way to regain balance. Some use criticism, some use mockery, others spread doubt, create distance, or suddenly change their attitude toward you without explanation. It feels personal because it is emotional, but the emotion often comes from their own inability to affect you the way they expected. Weak people need reactions to feel important. They need access to your emotions because it reassures them that they still matter in your mind. If they can upset you, they feel powerful. If they can confuse you, they feel superior. If they can make you chase their approval, they feel in control. But when none of those things work anymore, frustration begins growing silently inside them. That frustration slowly transforms into dislike. You'll notice it in the way people suddenly become colder after you stop seeking validation. The same confidence they once praised becomes arrogance. The same silence they respected becomes attitude. The same independence they admired becomes distance. Nothing about you truly changed except one thing. They lost emotional access to you. People often resent what they fail to control because failure damages the ego, and ego hates feeling powerless. Rather than admitting they no longer influence you, many people convince themselves that you became the problem. It protects their pride from facing reality. That's why emotionally independent people often attract hidden hostility without understanding why. They didn't attack anyone. They didn't start conflict. They simply stopped participating in emotional dependency. And for insecure minds, that alone feels offensive. Dislike can also come from comparison. Some people become irritated simply because your self-control exposes their lack of it. Your calmness reminds them how reactive they are. Your discipline highlights their inconsistency. Your silence exposes how desperate they are for attention. And instead of improving themselves, they choose resentment because resentment is easier than self-reflection. Weak minds would rather criticize strength than admit envy. The strange part is that dislike often grows strongest when you stop needing approval. As long as you seek validation, people feel comfortable around you because they understand your weakness. They know praise controls your mood. They know rejection affects your confidence. But once you stop depending on external approval, the emotional dynamic changes completely. Now they cannot predict your behavior the same way. Their compliments no longer manipulate you. Their criticism no longer breaks you. Their absence no longer controls your peace. And that loss of influence creates emotional discomfort inside them. Some individuals become obsessed with bringing confident people down simply because they cannot tolerate emotional independence. It challenges the unspoken hierarchy they rely on. In their mind, everyone should crave approval, fear judgment, and seek acceptance constantly. So when someone rises above that mindset, it feels unnatural to them. That's why they attempt to label you negatively. Humans instinctively attack what they cannot emotionally dominate. They call disciplined people boring. Quiet people become weird. Independent people become cold. Focused people become selfish. These labels are not objective truths. They are emotional reactions created by insecurity. Dislike is often hidden powerlessness, because powerless people need a target for their frustration. They cannot control your confidence, so they attack your character. They cannot break your peace, so they question your personality. They cannot influence your choices, so they create narratives designed to weaken your image in front of others. But beneath all that judgment is usually the same silent truth. They lost the ability to affect you emotionally, and their ego cannot accept it, because nothing frustrates insecure people more than realizing someone no longer needs their approval to feel valuable. Manipulators rarely announce themselves openly. They don't walk into your life wearing honesty on their face. Most of the time, they appear helpful, supportive, understanding, even caring. They study people quietly. They learn weaknesses, emotional patterns, fears, insecurities, and desires. Then they build influence slowly, almost invisibly, until the person no longer realizes how much of their behavior is being controlled from the outside. That's why independence becomes such a threat to them. An independent person is difficult to emotionally trap because they begin trusting their own judgment more than outside approval. They stop depending on constant reassurance. They stop seeking permission before making decisions. They stop explaining every move just to keep others comfortable. And the moment manipulators lose that emotional leverage, they begin feeling powerless. Manipulators survive through dependency. They need people uncertain enough to seek guidance constantly. They need emotional reactions they can predict and control. If they can make you doubt yourself, they can guide your choices. If they can make you fear rejection, they can shape your behavior. But once someone becomes mentally independent, those tactics start collapsing. That collapse creates frustration. You'll notice manipulators becoming irritated when your boundaries strengthen. Suddenly they accuse you of changing. They become colder when guilt stops working. They grow angry when silence replaces emotional reactions. What they truly hate is not your behavior. They hate losing access to your mind. Independent people force manipulators into uncertainty, and uncertainty terrifies controlling personalities. They no longer know how to pressure you emotionally. Their old methods stop producing the same results. The fear tactics weaken. The emotional games become visible. The fake concern loses its effect. That's why manipulators often attack confidence disguised as humility. They encourage self-doubt disguised as a vice. Disobedience disguised as respect. Their language sounds reasonable on the surface because manipulation works best when hidden normal behavior. A mentally free person begins noticing these patterns quickly. They recognize when kindness has conditions attached to it. They notice when support disappears the second they disagree. They observe how certain people become uncomfortable whenever control slips away from their hands. And once awareness enters your mind, manipulation becomes much harder to maintain. Manipulators especially fear people who can emotionally regulate themselves. Emotional chaos is one of their favorite weapons. If they can make you angry, insecure, guilty, or desperate, they can influence your decisions more easily. But calm individuals become difficult to destabilize. They observe before reacting. They think before responding. They refuse to let emotions become weapons used against them. That self-control threatens manipulative people deeply because it removes their strongest advantage. Most manipulators also rely on confusion. They mix affection with disrespect, praise with criticism, attention with distance. Their goal is to create emotional imbalance so the other person becomes psychologically dependent. A confused mind seeks clarity, and manipulators position themselves as the source of that clarity. But independent people eventually stop chasing explanations. They stop begging for consistency from inconsistent individuals. They stop sacrificing peace just to maintain toxic connections, and that emotional detachment destroys the manipulator's influence slowly. The dangerous thing about independence is that it spreads silently. When one person stops accepting manipulation, others begin noticing the behavior too. Suddenly, the manipulator loses control over the environment they built. Their authority weakens, their emotional influence fades, and insecure people panic when their control starts disappearing. That panic often reveals their true personality. People who once acted calm suddenly become aggressive. Those who pretended to support you begin criticizing everything you do. Some attempt guilt. Others attempt humiliation. Many create stories designed to damage your reputation because reputation attacks become the last weapon left when emotional control fails. Manipulators cannot tolerate people who think independently because independent minds are difficult to program emotionally. They ask questions, they trust instincts, they value peace more than approval. And most importantly, they become willing to walk away from environments designed to keep them small. That willingness to walk away is what truly terrifies controlling people, because the moment someone realizes they no longer need permission to protect their peace, manipulation begins losing its power completely. Confidence has a strange effect on insecure people. It exposes things they spend their entire lives trying to hide. Fear, weakness, dependence. The moment someone walks into a room without desperately needing approval, the atmosphere changes. People notice it immediately, even if nothing is said out loud. There's something unsettling about a person who remains comfortable in their own skin, while everyone else is silently performing for acceptance. Most insecurity survives through comparison and validation. People constantly measure their worth through attention, praise, status, and opinions from others. They build fragile identities based on how the world reacts to them. That's why confident individuals become threatening, not because they are loud or arrogant, but because they no longer play by the same emotional rules. A confident person does not panic when ignored. They do not collapse under criticism. They do not beg for recognition from people who never valued them properly. And insecure minds interpret that emotional stability as danger. The uncomfortable truth is that confidence acts like a mirror. It forces people to confront what they lack inside themselves. Someone who hates their own weakness will feel irritated around disciplined people. Someone addicted to validation will feel uncomfortable around independent minds. Someone filled with self-doubt will secretly resent people who trust themselves naturally. That resentment rarely appears honestly. Insecure people almost never admit envy directly. Instead, they disguise it through judgment. They label confidence as arrogance. They call self-respect selfishness. They describe emotional control as coldness. These labels protect their ego from admitting the deeper reality. Your confidence reminds them of everything they fear becoming. People who lack confidence also become obsessed with external control because internal stability is missing. They seek dominance over others emotionally, socially, or psychologically just to feel powerful temporarily. But when they encounter someone who cannot be easily manipulated through approval or rejection, insecurity begins surfacing immediately. That's why confident individuals often receive strange reactions from others. Some become defensive without reason. Others become overly critical. Some try to embarrass them publicly. Others attempt to test boundaries constantly. These behaviors are rarely random. Insecure people unconsciously search for proof that confident individuals are not as strong as they appear. They want to see emotional cracks, because those cracks make them feel safer. A truly confident person disrupts insecure environments simply by existing naturally. They don't need to dominate conversations to command presence. They don't need constant attention to feel important. Their energy feels different because it comes from internal security rather than external validation, and insecure people can sense that difference instantly. The problem is that many individuals mistake performance for confidence. Loudness is not confidence. Aggression is not confidence. Attention seeking is not confidence. Those behaviors often come from insecurity trying to protect itself. Real confidence is quiet, calm, controlled. It does not need to prove itself constantly, because it already knows its value internally. That kind of confidence becomes deeply intimidating to fragile minds, especially in environments where insecurity is normalized. In those spaces, people bond through fear, gossip, competition, and approval seeking. Everyone watches each other constantly, terrified of judgment. So when someone arrives who no longer fears being disliked, it breaks the emotional structure of the group. Suddenly, people begin questioning themselves unconsciously. Why are they so calm? Why don't they react? Why don't they seek attention like everyone else? And those questions create discomfort, because confidence exposes how dependent insecure people are on outside validation. Some individuals will even attempt to destroy confident people socially because insecurity feels powerless around emotional stability. They spread rumors, create false narratives, mock ambition, criticize boundaries, not because confidence harmed them directly, but because confidence made their own insecurity impossible to ignore. That's why confident people often become isolated over time. Weak minds prefer environments where everyone shares the same fear. Confidence disrupts that comfort zone. It challenges emotional dependency without speaking a single word. Because deep down, insecure people do not hate confidence itself. They hate the reflection it forces them to see inside themselves.